It's 2 days before the biggest linear algebra test of the year, and you're in trouble. In a lapse of poor judgment, you stayed up all night binging a Netflix show instead of studying, and now, with the test looming over your head, you're realizing how screwed you are. How in the world are you supposed to remember everything for this test? To answer this question, let's first understand how the body processes signals from its environment. Neurons, cells that produce and transmit information via electrical impulses, are the messengers of the nervous system. Composed of the cell body, the control center of the neuron, dendrites, feathery tips that reach out to neighboring cells, and an axon, a long extension that passes electrical messages to other cells, neurons transfer information from one neuron's axon terminals, the bulbous ends of the axon, to another neuron's dendrites. When an electrical pulse message reaches one neuron's axon terminals, neurotransmitters, chemical signals stored in the axon terminal, are released and cross the synapse, a tiny gap between two neurons, attaching to receptor proteins on the dendrite of another neuron and generating a new impulse. In this manner, neurons serve as the messengers that transfer information from one part of the nervous system to another. Now, let's learn how the brain understands these signals and stores them as information in memory. When you first encounter new material, for instance, dot products of matrices from math class, the brain begins the process of encoding or initially registering information into your memory system. This comes in the form of sensory electrical impulses. For example, a visual impulse would be seeing the definition on a whiteboard, and an audio impulse would be hearing your professor speak on the topic. These impulses are sent via a circuit of neurons to the hippocampus of the brain, which consolidates all of them into one experience. This experience is then stored as a specific neuron impulse circuit in short-term memory in the hippocampus. However, if information is important enough to be stored, it may be transferred over to the neocortex of the brain, where long-term memory is stored. Repeatedly firing certain neurons in a certain order, for instance the order that is needed to perform dot product calculations, makes it easier to repeat the same circuit, and the more a circuit is used or repeated, it'll more likely end up in long-term memory. In long-term memory, we can store unlimited amounts of information indefinitely, so you can imagine how useful this would be for remembering math formulas. To retrieve these memories, we often rely upon retrieval cues, environmental cues associated with information stored in our long-term memory that help us bring that information into our conscious mind. For example, the dot of a dot product is a retrieval cue for remembering the dot product formula. However, the effectiveness of a cue relies on how distinctive it is. A single cue cannot correspond to too many memories, or else it'll be relatively useless. Now, how does this tie back to effective studying? It would make sense to practice a method that helps us reinforce important circuits of information and makes use of a distinctive retrieval cue. Though you might be tempted to just reread your notes, such a practice wouldn't actively reinforce circuits or utilize a unique cue. Instead, by actively recalling information through retrieving facts from memory and testing yourself on concepts, you actually strengthen the connection between a cue and its corresponding information, and you reinforce the neuron circuit. How cool is that? So instead of frantically copying and rereading old material, try doing a practice test or two. And next time, maybe it would be a good idea to skip the Netflix show and study instead.